Things have changed for Nintendo ever since the release of the Nintendo Switch 2 this last June. For the longest time, fighting games on Nintendo systems have taken a back seat to the PlayStation 5 and Xbox versions. You can point to some exceptions like Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, which launched on the Nintendo Switch in 2019 with rollback and full crossplay, including with the Switch, with all other systems, but the large majority of fighting games that did release on the Nintendo Switch were always gimped in some way. Take a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ for example. It released at the same time as the other consoles and it looked pretty decent graphically, but it almost always got balance updates really late, and eventually it was the only version of the game that never received rollback netcode. Another ArcSys port was Guilty Gear Strive, which was widely praised for being such a high quality port to the aging handheld. It still suffered due, in my opinion, to how late it was ported, which resulted in a very low and near non-existent player base and indefinitely missing DLCs, which were only just released after almost a year. Other ArcSys games on the system looked beautiful, like BlazBlue, Central Fiction, and DNF Duel, but they suffered from a near fatal flaw, and that was the horrific delay-based netcode. You can point to games like DBFZ and BlazBlue and say those games had delay-based netcode on the other consoles as well, but DBFZ eventually had rollback added and DNF Duel launched with rollback netcode. But when it came to the Nintendo Switch edition, ArcSys decided to launch it with delay-based netcode. I do understand that there are technical difficulties and good reasons for why the Switch versions of some of these games might not have rollback netcode, but in the modern age of fighting games, you either put rollback in your game or you can expect it to not last very long, unless with the exception being of major properties like Dragon Ball. But even then, there's a reason that they eventually did end up adding rollback to DBFZ, and that's because the community absolutely demanded it. And for me, the lack of rollback was the whole reason that I didn't buy DNF Duel on the Nintendo Switch. There's a night and day difference between rollback and delay-based netcode. So for the Nintendo Switch versions of these games, getting the short end of the stick when it comes to the netcode really was a death knell for most games, along with other reasons as well, of course. The Nintendo Switch also saw other games like Melty Blood, Type Illumina, Under Night in Birth, and the All-Star Brawl games, and while these were simpler games, at least when we're talking about hardware demands, but while these were simpler games and they did include rollback, they never really attained big player bases. And another thing for why a lot of these games just didn't do well is obviously the lack of crossplay. That's obvious to anybody, but again, we're talking about a super out-of-date system like the old Nintendo Switch, which was out of date even when it released, so it's not too surprising that most of the more demanding fighting games like Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 11 and even DBFZ never got the more advanced features like rollback and crossplay. This is where the Nintendo Switch 2 comes in. So with the Switch 2, it actually feels like Nintendo is punching way above their weight class. It really does. On launch day, the Nintendo Switch 2 got Street Fighter 6 with rollback and full crossplay connectivity with all other platforms. And I should remind you here that Street Fighter 6 is the current generation fighting game. It's the most recent Street Fighter, which is still getting seasonal updates and DLC characters. The Switch 2 has also gotten WWE 2K25, which is pretty much a perfect port, running at 60 frames per second. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is also on the system, along with the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. Now, you might be saying to yourself that that's a very small list of fighting games. However, all you have to do is look at which games they are and how well they run. That tells you pretty much everything that you need to know. The Nintendo Switch 2 is more than capable of running any current generation fighting game, and it is my prediction that the Switch 2 will be getting them all. From a technical standpoint, the Switch 2 can run them all, but the other factor is, of course, the money. The Nintendo Switch 2 is the fastest selling console of all time, and even 7 months later, it's still breaking records. So you can't tell me that fighting game companies are not going to see that and want to put all their games on the system with full features. You know, even on the old Nintendo Switch, where it was actually a bad idea, you still had companies like WB putting their games on it, even though they couldn't run properly, like Mortal Kombat 11 and MK1. So why do that? The answer, of course, money. The original Nintendo Switch is at this point the highest selling console of all time in the United States and in Japan, but the Nintendo Switch 2 does not have a problem with power. So now, what do we know about the future of fighting games on the Nintendo Switch 2? So far, we have a few confirmations and some rumors. Tekken 8 is a very widely rumored fighting game to be coming to the Switch 2, and to be honest with you, I figured that Tekken 8 would have already been released on the Switch 2 by now. I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't been. And there's also this to take into consideration. The director of Tekken 8, Katsuhiro Harada, did say that porting Tekken 8 to the Switch 2 would be a quote-unquote massive undertaking. And you know what? I hear that. And yet, I look at a game like Street Fighter 6 and I think to myself, that was a launch day game for the Switch 2. And then on top of that, Capcom is already releasing not one, not two, and not even three, but 4 major AAA games for the Nintendo Switch 2 within the next 4 months. 2 of them are exclusively 9th generation games, and they would be Resident Evil 9 Requiem and Pragmata. But you mean to tell me that a 3D fighting game is more demanding than several full 3D games?
Somehow I doubt it.
I was going to talk a little bit more about Tekken 8 on the Switch 2, but I learned a few things and why we might not be getting it, but I'm going to wait to talk about that in a future video, so stay tuned for that. Another rumored game is Virtua Fighter 6, the newest VF which is currently in development and which has a really smooth looking defense system. Honestly, I think this new defense system is going to be similar to how the flow option in Avatar, the fighting game, works. That's how they got the defense to look so smooth, but at this point there isn't really much else to talk about with regards to VF6. I hope it comes to the Switch 2. But there is a Virtua Fighter game that is coming to the Nintendo Switch 2 soon, and that is Virtua Fighter 5 Revo. It was originally planned for release in the 4th quarter of 2025 for the Switch 2, but it looks now like it might be releasing in early 2026, though we don't have any official date yet. Other fighting games that are in development but yet to be revealed for the Nintendo Switch 2 are 2XKO and the Invincible fighting game. But the game that I'm most excited for, which we know for a fact is coming to the Nintendo Switch 2, is Avatar Legends, the fighting game. Strange name aside, this game looks absolutely insane, and it is slated to release for Switch 2 and other consoles during the summer of this year, so just a few months away. There was already an alpha playtest where a lot of people got to play it, me not being one of them, unfortunately, but we got a very good look at how the game plays, so it's no longer a mystery anymore, and there's a reason why there's so much hype behind this game now. It was announced officially for Nintendo Switch 2 along with the other consoles with full rollback netcode and crossplay as well, so that is going to be the best fighting game to look forward to, at least if you're me. But the big one that I haven't even mentioned yet, and you can't really talk about Nintendo Switch fighting games without this one, the Super Smash Bros. Series. Yeah, every Nintendo mainline console and even the 3DS has had its own Super Smash game, and with how popular the Switch 2 has become, I don't see that changing anytime soon. Although, in the case of the Switch 2, it's possible that they do with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate the same thing that they did with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the original Switch, where they ported the Wii U's Mario Kart, slapped the title Deluxe on it, and gave it some new DLC. Is that something that you guys would want to see for Super Smash Bros. On the Nintendo Switch 2, or do you want a brand new game? I'm kind of divided on that personally. I never really could play Ultimate for too long because the netcode was just so horrible. So I think a Smash Ultimate Deluxe with rollback netcode and some new content like stages and DLC characters would be a no-brainer. And probably that would be the smartest decision for Nintendo considering the condition of the market right now. but maybe I'm wrong about that. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, and that's gonna be it for this video. I'm gonna keep bringing you more combo videos, online matches, and video game news. I'm SwitchPlayed. Done.